My name is Anya Alvarez, and I'm a producer and founder of Major League Girls. And today we're going to be talking about design for development and how the structure of youth sports drives the culture of youth sports. From rules, from sidelining kids to the bench, to ranking children as young as 10 years old in a sport, to them specializing at a very early age. So we're going to be talking with some innovators today, and we're going to be learning from them. And I want to touch on my experiences quickly just based on this topic. I used to play golf competitively, and one of the things that we used to allow in my junior golf tournaments was to allow kids to drop the ball out of the rough, take it out of the bunker, give them a designated area to hit from if there was a hazard that they couldn't get over. And at the time there was pushback against it because it wasn't seen as real golf. But what I think it allowed is for kids who weren't as highly skilled to continue to compete and not feel like they couldn't play with others, and it allowed them to keep coming back to golf. So I'm excited for this topic today and to learn from everyone. To my right here, or wait, to my left. Sorry, I'm confused. We have, I'm so sorry, I'm totally, okay. All right, to my right here, we have Andre Lachance from the Business and Sport Development at Baseball Canada. Then we have Laura Webster, who is a Paralympian gold medalist in sitting volleyball. And then we have Ken Martell from USA Hockey in the coaching and development side of youth sport. So I want to start by asking you, how do rules contribute to good and bad behavior with the youth culture in sport?
That's a very good question. Thank you. I'm gonna start answering that first one. I guess if there's one takeaway, I'm gonna start with a takeaway at the beginning. Coaches will always coach to the competition system, no matter what. So whatever the changes you make to the rules of your game, the coaches will always adapt. And I'm going to give some ideas later on about some initiative we've done with baseball. And the second thing I would like to say also is that you need to ask yourself a question in your organization as far as who developed your competition system back then? Why was it developed that way? And should there be any changes? I was giving an example earlier, is when you look at hockey or baseball or football or basketball on TV, they do have a scoring system that determines who's going to win and who's going to lose. But who said that that scoring system at the pro level should be the same one for athletes in development? So why don't we use other metrics in order to stimulate development and in order to help coaches develop kids in a better fashion? So I'm going to give ideas later on about that.
Yeah, so along the same lines, coaches definitely were going to work to achieve success in whatever the competition structure is laid out. So if we can design our games that reward the right behaviors, whether that's giving extra points for fair play, things that are a little outside the box in terms of the rules of the professional or adult game, we'll get our coaches to behave in a more developmentally friendly way.
And we talked before about parents and how parents are also part of involving them into the structure of how you develop sport, right? And so what is the education process that you have to implement whenever you're restructuring in terms of educating the parents?
So I'll give you an example of what we've done in baseball. Some years ago I was going across the country and looking at what was the first experience for kids in my sport in Canada. And that first experience was T-ball. And I don't know how many of you have seen a T-ball game recently, but guys, it sucks. It's terrible. It's a terrible experience. So I came back to the office and we got to can this. It's terrible. So we not only we steal bases in baseball, we steal ideas also. So I look at other sports where they were doing, and I look at martial arts, and familiar with martial arts, they do have color belts to determine which level you are and everything based on competencies. So we came to develop a program. It's called Rally Cap, and it's a program that goes with competencies, with color hats. So based on throwing, hitting, receiving, running, and fundamental movement skills, we have 6 levels. And kids are now part of baseball for the first time. That experience is so positive that they want to stay involved for the second year. And with that in mind, now our membership we're probably one of the only sport in Canada where membership and participation is growing based on other factors. But based on that, we had also to educate parents about, okay, this is how the game will be played for the first time. Yes, we got resistance, but the education part of the parents is very, very important.
And Laura, is there an education part for parents also in adaptive sport?
I think one of the bigger problems that adaptive sports faces is dispelling the rumor that adaptive sports are only for disabled people. It's a big misconception. Adaptive sports emerged to allow people with disabilities, if you want to use that word, to play sports, but there's a misconception that adaptive sports are a watered down version of the regular sports that we see on TV, when in fact a lot of the adaptive sports are much more challenging and much more difficult than the able-bodied versions that are popular. And so that's a big step that a lot of Paralympians always try to fight for whenever we're speaking in public or meeting with groups of kids, is to encourage them to look past the label of it being only for disabled people, because that's not the case at all. And in fact, the only way that we're going to be able to grow the Paralympic movement and the support for the Paralympics and the athletes that compete in it is to get the support from the able-bodied community to realize that this is actually just a sport. It doesn't have to be labeled as a disabled sport. Once you start using those labels of disabled and non-disabled, you've already started to divide the population, and you've made that group of people different, and you have to be treated differently. When it should just be a sport. Adaptive sports should be introduced to kids at the elementary school level so that it becomes a normal sight for them. If you don't include that in your curriculum as you're introducing other sports in a PE class, then they don't become familiarized with it, and then they could go their entire adult life without even knowing that this whole world of sports exists. And I've met many adults in traveling around the world that have never even heard of the Paralympics, and let alone know what any of the Paralympic sports are. One of the most visible ones are, our track and field athletes, because you see a lot more of the individual sport athletes become more popular as far as sponsors and stuff go, and so they're a little bit more visible worldwide. But people aren't familiar with the other Paralympic sports, and that the Paralympics are even something that exists after the Olympic Games. They know the Olympics, and then they don't know that this entire worldwide sporting event goes on afterwards. So if we teach kids, if we start with the education there and explain to them what these sports are, then that will change their aspect and their thought that it's something different than what normal people play. And it just becomes a sport, a different sport that's actually a lot of fun. And it normalizes it for them so that when they're grown-ups and in the world, if you see somebody in a wheelchair or missing a limb, it's not this weird thing that you're not familiar with. You were taught about it. You open up the lines of communication where you make kids comfortable seeing different things and starting a conversation, as opposed to being afraid to ask questions in fear of insulting somebody. You familiarize it with them with sports and with people, and it becomes just the norm for them, which just helps with equality all around.
And, we're talking a lot about rules also and the actual structure of how youth sports are being developed, but how important is it in terms of the development of youth sports of breaking stereotypes, like giving girls access to baseball or hockey, and also creating access to adaptive sport?
Yeah, certainly. For us, we have girls-only programs that are in existence, but we certainly, because we're such a new sport in a lot of areas of the country, we may not have enough girls that are currently playing even to have an opportunity for a girls-only team. So it's important that we provide as many different access points as possible to try and attract girls into the game. Hopefully we grow to where we've got girls clubs and more of them across the country. But allowing for us, we don't have a boys division, we have a youth division. So in our country we have girls programs and then we have youth programs, just designed so that we can provide as much access as possible.
And for us, it's about the same. Like girls baseball is fairly new in Canada. It's about 15 years old. Same thing in the U.S. And we don't have the pool of athletes to create leagues and everything. But what's really getting trendy right now in our country is girls teams in boys leagues. So they do get their social together, which I think is really, really important. But in order to get better, because of where we are right now in our structure, they get good competition by facing boys. And at the end of the day, we're accomplishing two things at the same time, which is working for us right now.
Earlier, the French football executive mentioned that France is now asking clubs to give kids equal playing time on the field. What are your thoughts on that? And is that something that you're already trying to do?
Yeah, well, I mean, we try and tell all our coaches, you selected these players for your team. It's your responsibility to play every single one of them.
And we saw something interesting a couple of years ago when we, because of safety in our sport regarding arm care and everything, where we introduced a pitch count regulation in our sport some years ago. We found ourselves in a situation where coaches were telling us, you know, Andre, we really like the rule, but when we go to tournaments, we don't have enough pitchers. Well, the answer is, you know what? That's awesome because you have to coach now. You have to develop more. Because at the end of the day, you're going to have to push for multi-positions approach for your athletes. And that rule change impacted the way the coaches were behaving, and they were adapting to the new rule. So it says a lot about how rules could change behavior also with the coaches.
So for us as well, thinking about how we might incentivize playing time with rule changes rather than just coming out and saying, look, you have to play everybody fairly and equally. We've taken the stance that, as Andre pointed out before, we don't need rules that are the same for the National Hockey League as we do for our kids. So why do we need a roster, a team size, the same with 20 skaters the same way they do at the NHL level? So why not just make smaller rosters so that when kids show up at the game, everybody gets to play? Just make more teams.
Yeah.
So those types of rule changes for us have allowed to increase participation.
And how much of your ideas are being taken from other sports? And I mean, you talked a little bit about martial arts and what you've seen, but are you seeing that more often now where more organizations, youth sports organizations, are working together to learn from each other?
Well, absolutely. I think we've got a really healthy relationship with some of our other national governing bodies under the USOC umbrella. And I can tell you we're basically stealing ideas from each other continuously. And maybe it's, you know, the technical skills and things in our sports are all different, but kids are kids. So how do we work with kids? How do we motivate kids? How do we provide opportunities for kids? A lot of these things cross over really, really nicely. And like I said, we've got a great collaboration going on, and it's just going to get better, I think.
I think also, that sounded really loud, sorry. As far as the equal playing time goes, if you've got 8-year-old kids who are on a team and you're teaching them that you've got the starters and the bench players, instead of it being a team thing, it's more, well, you know, my competition is to be better than you, I'm better than you. And it's kind of more divided, whereas I think if you're trying to even out that playing time and teaching children how to work together as a team, regardless of who your teammate is, but how to play off of each other and how everybody's different strengths can help the team in general, that it teaches a very good thing for kids to get used to being able to work with other people instead of just the typical, you know, in volleyball, the starting six. Because then when you do have to, as you get older and your sport becomes more competitive, as you do have to change players, if you're not used to adapting to having different athletes in there and different teammates, then you're going to really struggle, and that'll, you know, affect how you compete. And so I think it's a great way to balance out the athletes as far as being able to work together with different people regardless of who your teammate is.
And here's an unusual connection between two sports that we've done in Canada that has been stolen, I think, now by other groups in other countries. Gymnastics / trampoline and golf, okay? So yeah, it's kind of strange, right? So imagine little Rosie, she's in gymnastics and she does trampoline, she loves trampoline. She works hard, trains hard, and she goes to her first competition, okay? And it's a judge sport, right? So she goes to the trampoline and does her thing, boom, 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 boom. And then It's her first competition. She's nervous, a bit excited, and then she misses a part of her routine, and then the competition system said, well, you're losing points because you didn't perform so well, right? So in golf, there's a beautiful thing called the mulligan. You know what the mulligan is, right? If you screw up, you can do it again and nobody sees it, right? So in trampoline now, they're using the mulligan. So for little Rosie, for the first time to do her trampoline, she could say mulligan once during the course of the competition, redo the routine, and then you get away with most of the time a better performance. So it takes you away from the disappointment of not performing well, the stress and the anxiety when you're 10 or 12. And when you talk about what's good for athlete development, this is a perfect practical idea of cross-sport collaboration.
I know a lot of adults that still take mulligans. So
No, and it's a second chance.
in about 15 minutes, we're going to open up for questions. So please submit them via Slido, and I think you hit the 8th floor and project play on there. All right. So, Andre, I want to ask you about some of the innovations that Baseball Canada is implementing, and I know that you're really excited to talk about some of this.
Yeah, I've talked earlier about the Rally Cap program that is getting crazy across Canada. We're talking about, well, for the size of our country, 50,000 hats a year is pretty significant. And the fact that the kids now are staying in our sport, because after T-ball, most of the time kids were leaving to another sport. Now we're getting kids to stay in our sport. But we've done some significant changes in also in the way we play game. We're piloting a different scoring system, like I said earlier. We've discussed that for quite some time. And again, like I said earlier, if I tell you tomorrow, if I tell coaches tomorrow that starting tomorrow, if you field the ground ball, if you throw the ball good to first base, and if the first baseman catches the ball, it gives you 3 points. What is it going to drive? So for coaches, they're going to start working at those fundamental skills because, again, coaches coach the competition system. So when you make a change to the rule, it will impact coach behavior. And at the end of the day, I'm happy because our kids are getting better. So those are the type of things that will kind of work. And there's a concept that we are big on also. It's called meaningful competition. So we want to make sure that when two teams are going to face each other, that they both feel they have a chance to compete and have a chance to win. And how many times have we seen blowouts in sports? It's ridiculous. Okay, so we need to find ways to solve that problem by either using the handicap, another golf stealing ideas, or using all kinds of other manipulation to the rule that we could use also in order to get to a challenge for both teams to be involved with. So those are the type of things that we kind of, and yes, it's outside the box, and yes, parents sometimes saying, what's happening here? But at the end of the day, we have to make sure that we do what's best for the kids.
And what are some of the structural changes that you have gone through to make baseball more accessible to girls? Because it's like we talked a little bit earlier about breaking stereotypes. Were there things structurally that you had to change to allow for that?
Not really, in the sense that baseball always welcomed girls. So now we're creating services and structures to keep them involved in our sports, which was not the case before. They were transitioning to softball at some point. Now we're keeping them. We have a national team that goes pretty well, I think. And we'll keep having different services and structure to keep them in the sport with quality coaching. What we've seen also with girls sometimes is that the coaching for boys is better than it is for girls. So we're trying to recruit better coaches for our female athletes.
Are they playing co-ed?
No, young, yes.
Okay.
And at some point, like I said earlier, we see a trend with girls teams playing with in boys leagues. Yeah.
And okay, Laura, I'm still unfamiliar with how sitting volleyball works. So what does that entail? And how did you get into the sport?
I got into the sport. I had cancer when I was 11, and I was always an athletic kid beforehand. And losing my leg, volleyball volleyball became my main sport that I started to play when I was 12 and got back into playing. And when I was about 15, I was playing at a club volleyball tournament, standing volleyball, in California, and a ref came up to my parents and gave them a card for somebody at USA Volleyball. And we got in touch. They said they were trying to start a women's Paralympic team, and that it was sitting volleyball. And I said, no, thank you. I play standing volleyball. Thanks, but no thanks. I'm not disabled. I don't. Thank you, but I'm not interested. And the coach urged me a lot to come, and so I went to the first ever women's sitting volleyball training camp at the OTC in Colorado Springs. And I had no idea what sitting volleyball was, so it was new to me then as well. This was in February of 2003. And I walked in and I saw 6 people sitting on the court, on their butts, on the ground, on a smaller court. The base of the net was on the ground. The net rises to about 3 feet high. And I was totally taken aback because I didn't know what I was coming into. I did not grow up knowing adaptive sports, and even after I was sick, I didn't have a use for adaptive sports in my life. It wasn't, I just, played in school. And so it was a really big learning thing for me, getting over that hump of, the disabled sports, and are people going to view me as disabled if I'm playing this? And so the sport has obviously changed a lot since it started back in 2003. We've grown, and to our gold medal in Rio in 2016. But the basics of sitting volleyball are it's the same sport as standing volleyball, except the court is smaller. It's still 6-on-6, just as is indoor standing volleyball, and the net is lower. And most of our athletes are amputees of some sort. Those of us that have leg prosthetics, we don't wear them because you move faster without them. The biggest changes are you don't have your legs to move, so you have to move with your hands, and then you still have to get your hands up to play the ball. And since the net is lower and the court is smaller, it's a much faster reaction time. So it's a much faster sport than standing volleyball. And also, since we are sitting on the ground, in standing volleyball you have foot faults, and your feet have to be behind the service line when you serve and behind the back row attack line when you swing. And our butt cheeks act as our feet in those types of rules. So your booty has to be behind the line when serving and back row attack. And then also when you're at the net blocking, those with knees tend to come up on their knees when they're blocking to get as big as they can be. So you have to have one butt cheek in contact with the floor when you are at the net and also attacking, so that it can keep the level so people can't come up and cheat. So yeah, so it's the same thing, but just a couple little tweaks. You can also block the serve, which is different as well, but it's still volleyball, just harder.
No, there aren't very many sports that enable non-adaptive and adaptive kids to play with each other. So what are the benefits that you see from that, and how does sitting volleyball obviously accommodates to that?
Paralympic sports are really hard because there isn't a pool. There is not the pool of disabled athletes who would qualify to play in the Paralympics is obviously much smaller than the able-bodied community. So the only way we are to grow our sports is to mix able-bodied and disabled athletes. Because otherwise you just don't have enough people to play team sports if you just keep it limited to disabled people that would qualify to play. So that's where really the growth is going to work for us, and it will not only help children, able-bodied children, to mingle and be a part of, if they've got a classmate in a wheelchair or missing a limb or whatever it might be, that understanding will grow, but it'll also help to grow the normalcy of Paralympic sports. And so we really rely on the able-bodied community to help us spread our sport, because we can't do it without everybody, without the community.
And Ken, you've made some recent changes at USA Hockey, and you recently eliminated body checking. Can you tell me?
We went through that a couple of years ago. Obviously, we get the pushback like people do. In most sports, when you make a significant change, people think, well, that's not real hockey, or that's not the way the game's played. But it's had some great effects. We did it. Certainly, there's a safety aspect to it. The research that we are finding out about youth sport, and whether it's concussions or just the physical contact, repeated contacts, certainly that played into it. But it was also done for a skill development reason. We wanted kids to play with the puck, have confidence with it. And one of the best things it's done for us, not just on the ice, but the entire angst in the building has relaxed, because parents, they're really into their kids when they're playing, and they're excited, and when they see two kids run into each other, whether it's done fairly or not, they just see their own kid fell down, and that can't be right. So for them, it's relaxed the playing atmosphere just in the stands and those things, which again help with the whole youth sports experience. We've seen a slight bump in retention from it. Not a huge bump, but certainly a better atmosphere in our building beyond just what is going on the ice surface.
And what about girls' participation in that? Do you think that helped increase getting more girls involved in the sport?
I think it allows girls, you know, they can continue to play with the boys as long as they want. Like I said, it's a youth division, but that tended to be a line where some girls just said, you know what, I don't want to participate in that when it's full body checking. So it's allowed them just more opportunity to continue on the boys' side if they would like to, or play with boys, versus jumping in and trying to have a girls-only team, which can, you know, we're a sport that we're very facilities driven, and in some areas it's just a really long distance to travel. So forming a girls' team sometimes has been difficult, where you're drawing from multiple ages now just to have the team. So this is allowing us to just provide more opportunity.
And you also eliminated national championships for Pee Wee.
At 12U, yeah.
Why did you decide to do that, and how has that worked out?
I think it's worked out really well. A lot of people, you know, when you first start to make a rule change, everyone thinks, oh, you know, this is terrible. You know, and USA Hockey, whenever they put on an event, they do a great job. The organization, people are always excited. It was a great experience. But for us, what we know about kids and kids sports, we just felt it would be very hypocritical for our own organization to offer up an event that encourages people in the field to start to put together and aggregate super teams and those things at an early age, because it's not just at 12U that would start. That's incentivizing. Well, we got to get the 10-year-olds together so that they're ready to compete in 2 years for a national championship. So that elimination, certainly there were a couple of clubs that were aggregating players that were upset when we took it away. But the funny thing is there's been zero pushback from a lot of the families, and your membership's not screaming for this. They're not saying, hey, let's add another expensive trip at the end of the season and extend the season even longer than it already is, because we want more. That's not the reality of what's happened. So people, once it was eliminated, just crickets. The same with our body checking. Lots of people that were all worked up about this, vehemently against this, and the pushback now that we've done it is, again, it's crickets. People like it.
Now this is a question for all of you. Is this something that do you feel the pushback normally comes from the sport organizations or from parents? And how do you deal with the pushback and encourage other youth sports organizations to really take a hard look at themselves and not be afraid to make changes?
Well, I think the pushback comes a lot from the parents. When you ask the kids about if they like the new change, or they just want to play. They just want to play, so they don't really care too much. But that piece about parents' education is so important. It's very important in any change that you want to accomplish in your own organization. I think it's really important that you put emphasis on communicating the change, and especially to the parents, because at the end of the day, those will be the one that will be more of the roadblock than the kids and also the coaches.
I actually think, yeah, we do get that crazy one or two parents, but I think most parents are pretty sane. They kind of come at this. The problem with our youth sports structure is there's no one that's saying, yeah, that's crazy behavior, right? The club that wants to aggregate the player, we have to do this. People in the marketplace are telling, a lot of our clubs are telling families, well, you have to do this. You have to travel from LA to Chicago this weekend with your 10-year-old to play, because that's where they're going to get competition. And there hasn't been anybody in the marketplace basically saying, no, your feelings as a parent that's a little out of whack are actually right. So for us to make the statements we're doing to reinforce that, those standards, I think is giving the parents now something to grab onto and go, oh. So they can talk intelligently now to the wacko in the rink, so to speak, and say that's not good behavior.
Yeah.
So it's been important for us to Andre's point, to keep communicating continually.
Now, in golf, certain leagues have made different rules of not allowing parents to caddy for their kids, which I think is a good thing. And separating the kids from their parents during competition. Is that something that has happened within your sport, Laura, or with what you've done at Baseball Canada or USA Hockey?
I think volleyball parents are probably rather mellow compared to hockey parents.
Okay.
Ours are good. Come on.
But no, I mean, as far as parents, I've coached juniors standing volleyball, and we've had those parents that at practices are on the sideline, right at the service line, just coaching their kid from right there, right, whispering in their ear, and it's just like, they're 15. She's already not happy out here, and you're, like, just read her. She's not happy. I think you're always going to have those kind of parents and stuff, but hopefully they get the hint that it's not working, and you're not the coach, so step away.
But there's no organizational rules within any of your organizations that separate parents from the kids?
No.
In terms of coaching and those things?
Yeah.
No, we haven't. I mean, we're like most sports where we rely on, local volunteers, and it can be as big a scramble at the last minute to say, like, we need coaches, we need people that are involved. So it's up to NGBs and organizations like others that are in attendance here to provide resources for parents, make it as easy as possible, because without those volunteers, we don't have youth sport in a lot of cases. So we have to cultivate it and work at it and, make their lives easy.
Awesome. Well, I think we're ready for some questions. And I don't know who has the question.
In the back there.
Our Q&A question comes from Joe. In what ways have adaptive sports inspired more developmentally fun and appropriate play for all kids?
I think from my experience of being in elementary schools and introducing kids to sitting volleyball, they light up because it's a fun, different, it's something different that they've never done before in most cases. And it's something that feels that you can easily cater to them, age appropriately, of course. I mean, when we go in, it's as easy as stringing a rope across two, we do badminton nets a lot for elementary schools, and you use a big beach ball. And so you're adapting the adaptive sport to the age of the children to make it so it's just a demonstration for them, just so that they can start to learn and get a grasp of that concept. And I think any adaptive sport can be adapted to the elementary setting on a whim if need be, just to introduce that to the kids and to let them get a feel for what it's like, and just to realize that it's fun.
Should we be keeping score? What are your thoughts on programs that have done away with scorekeeping? When is it appropriate?
Kids are keeping score.
Yeah.
Like, they know. I think there's nothing wrong with keeping score in a competition. It's when you start with the tables and standings and these things where now the adults are keeping track, and I think that's where things really start to escalate. Competition's good. Kids, that's why they play. They love to compete. It's just the kids don't take it too far. It's the adults that overextend everything.
And to me, it's not more the scoring, more of the competition format. We see too many leagues nowadays that has, like at the start of the year, let's say we have 12 teams, they're going to say only 8 teams will make the playoff versus all the teams making the playoff. And just that change totally changed the behavior of the coaches. Because if only a certain number of teams will make it to the playoff, the focus at the start of the year will be on tactics, strategies, and how to win the game on Friday. But if I tell you that all the teams are making the playoff, then the focus is changing. Again, coaches coach the competition system. Now they're going to work on skills development at the start of the year, and they will focus on tactics and strategies later in the season when it's important to focus on that. So it makes total sense. But again, like, it's not about scoring system, it's more about the format of the season / competition that to me is really important.
So development over winning,
Totally.
essentially. One more? Oh, we're wrapping up? Okay. Oh, dang. I wanted to keep talking to you. Well, thanks for hanging out with me today and with everyone here. If you want to continue talking to the panelists, we're going to be around if you want to ask some more questions. And I guess that's it.
Thank you.
Thanks.